All right. So Jenny, we will get going here at 8:02 and welcome everybody. Please do continue to use the chat. As Jenny mentioned, we will hop to our land recognition and then I will happily introduce our guest with us this morning. So Jenny, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, know that this is a small but important part of our usually Friday mornings. We're here on Tuesday. We're going to have a little bit of a problem for the rest of the week. But we like to take a moment just to recognize the land where we are joining you from today. The picture on the screen is downtown Calgary. And SAIT's main campus is also based in Calgary as well. There's a great Indigenous word, Makintas, which means the meeting of two rivers, the elbow of the river. And of course, in Calgary here, it's the Bow River and the Elbow River. So for SAIT and anywhere else in Calgary, we are on the traditional territories of Treaty 7. That includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. We honor and acknowledge all the First Nations, Métis and Inuit people who have lived, traveled, and gathered on these lands for many, many years. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. As always, so very well done, Jenny. And good morning, everybody. Of course, Jenny and I are back. I'm pleased to introduce Evan Westlake, who is joining us this morning. Evan is one of our tremendous facilitators that we have here at SAIT. Evan's also an executive coach. He facilitates with others as well. He's a TEDx speaker and has a lot of great insight, focus on helping teams improve their communication and their accountability. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So Evan, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. And accountability. Simple subject. Yeah. We should be able to polish this off in about 5 minutes and get folks on with their day.
Oh, sure. I think if we polled the crowd, they would give us 3 definitions of accountability and we could go for early coffee.
That's right. But why, we talk a lot about this at work. Accountability is this big piece that, if everybody could just be accountable to do what they said they were going to do, things would be so much simpler, so much better. So why is this important to focus on, and where do we, I'll kind of throw it out there, where do we see it potentially go wrong to start with? And maybe we'll kind of start down that trailhead and see where it takes us.
Yeah, we'll start with 2 little questions. Why is this important? Well, I mean, why it's important, and maybe taking the joke back and putting it out as a very serious question to everyone who's listening. When you hear the word accountability, I wonder, and I often do this in workshops, what other terms come up? What are the synonyms? What else do you think of? And before people start rattling off in the chat, I'm just going to take a few guesses because there are a few problems and there are a few things that contribute to why this matters. Not the least of which are that in most organizations and most teams, feedback happens when things go wrong, far more often than when things go right. And people think that accountability means blame. They think that accountability means someone else needs to make a change. Accountability is just as much about the system that we're in and the environment that we're in, and whether or not it's okay for me to reach into that pile of things to do that I see, the problems and challenges I see, and pick something up and own it. And if there's ever reluctance to reach in and pick something up and own it, that's the beginning of the accountability problem. And frankly, that's why I think we need to work on it more, because I want people on my team who pick things up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there's a couple of great comments in here. Emily, talks about it being an ownership mentality. First, failing forward. My eyes are
failing forward.
My eyes are either failing me or falling me this morning.
No, it's falling.
It's a level of leadership maturity, responsibility. That's an interesting one. Jenny and I were talking about this ahead of time, and maybe just to kind of take that rabbit hole. What's the difference between responsibility and accountability?
Oh boy. Certainly there's a massive overlap. And as recently as last night, playing text tag with my son about responding to a job opportunity, I made the quip to turn responsible into response-able, and to say you're capable of responding to this person, and therefore, by extension, you have a sliver of responsibility. It's a bit of a quip, but if a person has the rational ability to step forward, then they have the edge of responsibility. What's the difference between accountable and responsible? If you look at classic models, the difference might be something like who makes the decision, who in their team gets to have the maybe credit, but a more mature leader will recognize that there's people around them that are contributing to that and therefore spread that credit. I'm fascinated by the idea of maturity that someone dropped in there, and that often accountability is looked at as an individual thing, that you're individually accountable for this and I'm individually accountable for that, and we spread all the pieces out and say here's yours and yours and yours and mine. But it's generally accepted in psychology for decades and decades now that maturity has a bit of a scale, and independence is only the middle of the scale. That really mature people go beyond independence to interdependence, and they figure out how 1 + 1 = 3, how the two of us working together create more. So the question then becomes, with accountability, how do we share this accountability? How do I create a space where you and I can both work on it, and we can both own it, and we can both move forward and try to solve something better than one of us would by ourselves? Interdependence requires a lot of courage.
Absolutely. Jenny, some thoughts in there. I see you.
No, I like that. Go on.
No, I was leaning in, so go on.
No, I like it. And I think the really key piece for me in there was accountability is a system. And when we think about some of the things that Evan was just saying, when we classically think of accountability, it gets difficult when we're in a blame culture, and a blame culture is all about pointing a finger. Whereas when accountability is a system, now it's that interdependence that Evan was just talking about. And I love that you said that courage is required in there, because it does take that piece of courage and trust within that system. So that's where I was sort of sitting for the second there. And Martin's just popped in the chat. Unfortunately, it's not gone to everybody, but it says, does it all start with trust? And I think there's a good level of that.
Yeah. And man, there are a lot of rabbit holes in every conversation. So yes, it starts with trust, and back to the mature leader, back to the leader who's creating a sense of accountability. There's a lot of communication about trust that doesn't happen. My favorite rant about trust is, it's not a paintbrush. If I trust you, that doesn't mean I trust you I trust you with everything all the time. I'll throw back to my teenager. I trust him with the boat. I don't trust him with my bike. What's that about? It changes from person to person and scenario to scenario. And it's on us to press pause every once in a while and turn on our discernment and think, what do I trust this person with? How far do I trust this person? And then are they capable of going that far? Because there's a few questions inside trust. It's not just a big paintbrush. I do, I don't, I will, I won't.
And we've mentioned this on Fridays, today's before, but that trust, I really like that breakdown that Feltman gives of trust. We use it a lot at SAIT. So when you look at trust, we assess it in sincerity, reliability, competence, and the fourth one, care, is the fourth one. I thought it'd run away from me. So when we start to look at it that way, exactly as you said, Evan, we can begin to pinpoint where is it in this conversation, and that competence piece, which really attaches to this accountability. Competence doesn't mean perfect, and competence is also as much about being able to say, I don't have the skill set for this, and I need some help, or I don't have the resource to do this, and can I have some help? So I think that's a key part too, for both leaders and their team members.
Right.
So Jenny, you just said something. I want to get back. Great conversation so far. There's a few comments here and a couple questions tie into what we've got. Sean, I love it. Results with an exclamation point. That's I think that's the accountability coming from a sales leader. If I'm thinking of the right Sean here, and I totally get that. And so I think there is a degree of, we focus on accountability because we are looking for results in some way, shape, or form, whether that's, a revenue outcome or a project deadline or something like that. So maybe there's some conversation in this piece around results. But the questions, and Jenny, this ties back to what you were just saying. So the first question here is, if you want someone to pick up something that they have never done, i.e. be accountable for, training or handover of some sort. So I'm going to assume that if you're a leader looking to somebody new to take on something, I think the obvious answer to me to this one is yes. But I'm sure, as with all questions or scenarios, there's maybe a yes, but. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that question.
Well, so the question is about handing over the accountability. The question is about getting someone to pick up something that they haven't done before.
Yeah.
The haven't done before leads my mind down a training angle, which is which is the beginning of accountability. The classic, and I'm going to throw back, 20 years to when I was working in hotels and restaurants, and it was my role to train all these people. I moved around Western Canada, hired hundreds of staff, and opened a half dozen restaurants. And the classic model we used, very simple, but you can get deep into it, was explain, demonstrate, practice. And it's on me as the person who's giving this, whoever this is, that has this new responsibility, this new thing that they've never done before, to explain it. And then if I'm being thorough, get them to explain it back, to demonstrate it. And if I'm being thorough, get them to demonstrate it back, which means I don't touch the mouse, right? Or I don't do it for them at all in any way. And then to leave it with them to practice over and over and over and over and over again, really soon after that part where they demonstrated back, because practice does make permanent, and conscious practice makes improvement. And those three steps have worked really well. You can get very sophisticated with them if you want to blow them up. I hope that answers. I hope that speaks to the question.
Anything to add to that? Oh, sorry, Evan. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
I'll bite my tongue.
Okay, Jenny, I'm just going to stop the here so we can come together.
No, I agree, and I like that. I think, where my head goes to in there, with a lot of leaders who probably have joined us this morning, who are caught in that ever-ending whirlwind where we have not enough people, and we have to get the job done, and we have to hit those results. As Craig said, it is about results, about performance. And you can almost feel the wind being sucked out of people as we say, take the time, train them. And we know that's a time investment, and we know that's really difficult as well. So I think, there's a good contemplation piece as you look at accountability for, what, as a leader, what do you have in terms of time and availability to give to that? And does it always have to be you? And we can displace some of that, I think, quite quickly once we look at that.
Yeah. And Julian, sorry, I was going to say, Julian's just put an interesting comment in here. I think this is about new behaviors, but inspect on new expectations, right? So as a leader, maybe inspecting, I think for some may have a bit of a negative connotation, but it really is are you checking on progress? Are you ensuring that you're helping people along the way, is the way that I interpret that. I know Julian to be a good guy. And I don't think he's
well. And a fun twist on that, Julian, is depending on what language is your first language, the word control in some other languages translates to monitor.
It's interesting.
It doesn't translate to take over and direct. It translates to pay attention and watch.
Yeah.
And I really like that pay attention. Like, that's crucial. I think, as a general blanket statement, we're not that brilliant with expectations. We're really clear back here somewhere, but we're not clear what lands. And without that clarity, we leave people without what they need. But if we pay attention, we can see that pretty quickly. But we have to be able to pay attention.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and tie a couple thoughts together here, because I know in chatting with some folks ahead of today's session, and some of the things that they were looking for is, how do you, as a leader, how do you help people maintain their accountabilities, right? And we said we have another question here in the Q&A still around, when we develop RACI, results, accountabilities, consult, and inform, we are always told to have only one accountable person where you can have multiple responsible people. In today's conversation, I'm a little confused between responsible and accountable. So I think
yeah, and a
little bit more.
Thank you for the touch on RACI, the reach to RACI, because it is a clear, succinct model, and inside that model, accountable and responsible have definitions.
Yes.
Inside the model, a person who is responsible is acting on, working on, is one of the doers. A person who's accountable is one of the deciders. And that's one of the key distinctions. There are others, if we want to get into, a 30-minute talk about RACI and using it. I'm open, but that's one of the little threads that distinguishes the two, if you're following that model and the definitions inside that model.
Okay, so
the doer versus the decider.
So it's very specific definitions within that particular model, which can be a little mind-numbing if you don't like using RACI models. That's just, I may have a leaning on that one.
But it's helpful if you understand it, to just have it, simmering around the back of your head. I had a fellow doing a renovation in our basement, turning 1/3 of the basement into a bedroom. And on a regular basis, he would call me down for a few minutes, or I would go to check on him. There's the communication element, right? And I would go back and talk to my wife, or the kid who's going to live in that bedroom. Who do we need to inform? And he would be asking me questions about what he's going to do, because it's my house and it's my basement, and I'm the one carrying the majority of the accountability. He's doing all the work. He's the one carrying the majority of the responsibility. The only trick I would add to RACI is that we like to think black and white. He's got 100% of the responsibility. She's got 100% of the accountability. It isn't. This fellow working in the basement, he and I talked.
Yeah.
And he helped me make the decision. I'm accountable. And I helped him decide, and I helped him orient himself on which steps to go first or second, because I named the priorities. He's responsible, but I'm contributing to it still.
Yeah. No, I know exactly where you're coming from. I think where I get hung up on RACI is some of the methodology and the tracking, and it's just not my
life by spreadsheet.
Exactly. So to come back to this piece then around, ultimately we talk about accountability, I think, because as a leader, you've got results you have to generate. You've got results your team members are responsible or accountable to. I'm not talking in the RACI sense now. So what are those, I think maybe some practical thoughts, tips, ideas around how do you kind of create that culture of accountability? Is there a cadence around this? Is there other tools, communication around this that you would lean into?
Well, actually, the question you're asking jumps me to one of the slides that we prepped. So if I can just press go here real quick, I would absolutely use something like this to add to a cadence, especially when it is a new expectation, or what I will call a critical expectation, something that really matters. If we want to get this done by the weekend, if we want to hit this, one of our 3 or 4 big overarching goals, that the results matter, but underneath the results, there's all kinds of other things that happen, not the least of which are the actions, the thinking, the beliefs, what people experience. And it's on us when we communicate an expectation to frame it, to frame that expectation inside the current vision or strategies or priorities to make reference to things that really matter to this team. It's on me as the leader to ask the question internally and with this other person, is this achievable? Do you have the resources you need, time, money, help, materials, whatever that means, obtainable? I often think about resources when I'm asking that question. And of course, their ability. Are they capable? Have they done anything remotely like this before? Humans are great at generalizing from a similar project to this new project. Is it repeatable? And that's the similar to new comes in handy. Can this expectation, this project, can it be done a second time, a third time? Can you take something from it and reapply it again in the future? And sometimes that repeatable one can't be accomplished. Sometimes it is a unique, and we're not going to do this again for years. I once upon a time launched a brand new proprietary in-house loyalty program. And a bunch of the things we did were repeatable, and a bunch of the things we did were not. You did them once. And measurable. I could go a long way down the rant about measurable, but throw to the comment earlier, and we all circled around it. What do you notice? What will people notice? What will people measure? Sure, in numbers, but also what will people measure in instances, in occurrences, in effects? North America loves to measure things with numbers. That's not the only way to measure things.
Yeah.
And we gotta, to build accountability, we gotta open our minds up to measuring if what I want is for this person to start thinking ahead and being more proactive and picking up responsibility, what are some of the side effects of that? And it's on me to notice those side effects, because that's the measurement in bunny ears, right?
Yeah.
And there's two things in there, Craig. I think you asked about like building a culture. Like when you look at it, we are the culture. Any one of us is the culture. And so as Evan said, that gives you the opportunity. I really like this form, the expectation, but it gives you the opportunity to catch people doing things right. And there's a statement in all of this, and I can't remember who said it, but hold yourself accountable and hold others able. And that's a different, there's so much gray in here, but when you set the expectation clearly, as you can see on the screen, you're able to hold others able and hold yourself accountable. Like, what part do I play in this each and every time?
Yeah, I like that. So it kind of speaks to, for me, a little bit to, clearly, if we're sitting here having this conversation, we've got people that have decided it's important enough to join us this morning. That accountability is something that is tough to achieve or reinforce, or, as a leader, hold other people to. So what keeps leaders from holding others accountable? What keeps peers from holding each other accountable? That one, I think, gets to be a little more tricky. So maybe we start on where do leaders struggle in holding members of their team accountable, and why?
Wow. Where do they struggle and why? So it was mentioned earlier that about half of my world is one-on-one executive coaching. And I am regularly having the conversation with people about, where do you put your time and energy? Where do you put the resource of you? And what is the future you want to see happen, have happen? What does Craig on Friday wish that Craig on Tuesday had done? And I think there are a handful of reasons why a leader wouldn't hold either a peer or an employee accountable. And here's the kicker: these kinds of behaviors, holding people accountable, are not hierarchical. When I do this with a peer or with the person above me, I can hold the person above me accountable. But why don't we do it is the direct question. And I mean, anyone out there, drop in. Why have you hesitated?
Yeah.
Why have you put it off for 3 days? Why have you not brought it up? because the first step in holding someone accountable is to bring up the expectation and the gap relative to what they've done or not done. Fear of conflict, top of the list, absolutely. There's often no consequence, so I bring it up and then nothing happens, so why bother bringing it up? I'm wasting my energy going down this hole to where nothing happens anyway, so, you know, why pull the guy over if I can't give him a ticket? Cheeky, but right? Thank you, Julian. Failed to set the expectation at the beginning. If I now go and have this conversation, it's back on me. And that's a great one, because let's face it, there ought not to be a surprise when people get in trouble for not doing their job. But I can feel us even now swimming back into accountability as blame, accountability as bad news.
And I think
I would suggest the one that we haven't spoken, real quick, sorry, Jenny, is that at the beginning, when we were setting the expectation, we didn't name that measurable, that thing we're looking for as how we'll know this is working. We'll know this is working when all of your bags are at the front door, my kids for the weekend. We'll know this is working when more of our customers are coming back without us having to market. We don't have to sell them. They just come back. That's a measurement. We'll know this is working when our index score goes up, when our margin goes up, and we have to name these things.
And there's a term out there, yeah, I think it's conditions of satisfaction. Like, do you actually know what you're looking for? Which comes back to that clear expectation, which comes right back to hold yourself accountable and hold others able. Like, you're accountable to that conversation. If you didn't set the expectation clearly, then have that conversation and reset or realign or dive in there. And those conversations are tough. Like, generally, we want to be liked. We want to be in control. We don't want to upset other people. And we always back away. And yet, if we can have that conversation, we're so much better off on the other side. So again, you have to hold yourself accountable. And there's a, go ahead, sorry.
Well, and that throws to the, okay, so the way I'm going to hold them accountable is not for anyone to get in trouble, so to speak, or to be, the way I'm holding them accountable is to press restart.
Yes.
There's amazing power in the start of anything. The start of the meeting, the start of the conversation, the start of the day, the start of the week. And if you press restart, okay, we screwed up, Jenny, last week when we were setting up this workshop, we didn't talk about how many slides there should be. Evan, can you prep one more?
Yeah.
And restart that.
And there's that, we use it all the time in communication. It's an acronym again, I'm sorry, everybody, but there's a difference in two conversations. So you can get stuck in bed, and bed is blame, excuses, and denial. So when we hear that either in our own heads or to other people, that conversation is a downward spiral. We're not moving. We're not going to go anywhere when we're stuck in bed. And the alternative, thank you, Craig. The alternative is to grab the oars and move forward. So ownership, accountability, responsibility for myself. And so as you just said there, Evan, okay, like I got this wrong last week. Let's reset. Let's start this conversation again. And as you said, there's a power in there because we have that ability to shift forward. So like,
And what you're describing is a really neat version of influence that does a lot for accountability.
Yeah.
And it's basically reciprocity. It's saying, all right, yesterday we messed up. Last week we didn't get this right. What I'm going to do is, and I reach in and pick up some ownership. What I'm looking for you to do is ABC, and you reach in and pick up some ownership. Because I named that we both did that, got that wrong, and we're resetting, and I'm picking up some. That leads into it's safer for this person to pick up some, and they know they're not the only one in here. Reciprocity is an amazingly powerful tool and underused. If I say what I'm doing, then ask someone else to take ownership, they're way more likely to reach in.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Couple of really good comments here. I'll go back to Martin's. I found the difference between good and great organizations is a relentless approach. I love that, relentless. approach to accountability for supporting and achieving expected results. I think some drop this because it takes hard work and having the tough conversations. 100%. This isn't simple. Sorry, is that the mic drop?
No.
Yeah,
See it.
Yeah, it's not the pattern.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
There's a really great podcast episode. If you know the name Adam Grant, his podcast is called Work Life. And one of the episodes, I can't remember which one, you'll have to Google it. Adam Grant, Work Life. One of the podcast episodes is about an organization that just goes over the wall on feedback, about getting comfortable with feedback. And what they've done is contributed to accountability by making it possible for anyone and everyone in the organization to say, Craig, love the content in that meeting. We really just didn't follow the agenda. And next time, can we follow the agenda? A little bit of feedback, we didn't follow the agenda.
Were you in my latest meeting?
No, but I've been in enough to know. We wasted a bunch of time. The reason we ended up late was, and by empowering everyone to do that, there's this culture that he describes, where people just tell each other, that was a D, that was a C, that was fantastic, and.
Yeah, and there's the key, and. There's the, we've got to hear and, or this was great, and the and keeps the momentum, which comes back to, I forget whose it was, I'm really sorry, but that great comment, this is hard work and intentional, it's every day.
Yeah.
And Emily, you jumped in here with something about providing. And that's the back in that formula. Do they have the resources they need? And sometimes the resource is, who can you talk to? Sometimes the resource is, I'm available on Thursday for half an hour. Sometimes the resource is people. We forget that the resource isn't necessarily money or time. It's also access to people who will help you think about this.
Yeah.
A big challenge with accountability is that the majority of our work is not with our hands, therefore time and gear. It's in our head. And if the work is in your head, then you need other people to help you think in order to move forward. That's the support you need to be accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good comment here too from Sean. I appreciate this. Comment, need a system or structure for accountability that you and your team agree on. And then I'm not sure I quite follow the second part, but then start tossing things through it. Right. But this, and Sean, go ahead, Evan.
Well, I'll steal from that for a quick second, is the rhythm.
Yeah.
What's the rhythm? Can't remember the author's name. The book is called the Rockefeller Habits. And he talks about a couple of things that Rockefeller was just regularly did that made him really successful. And one of them was he had rhythms that were known to everyone. And on Tuesday, we're going to talk about this project. And on Thursday, we're going to look at the SG&A lines. And there's a rhythm.
Yeah.
And if there's a rhythm to the accountability, people know, oh man, I've got to have this in by Thursday because we're going to have to talk about it on Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking through some other math. There you go. Thank you, Kat. No, great. This is an interesting comment here from Lisa. Vulnerability plays a role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As in me wanting to hold others accountable, I got to be vulnerable enough to say, here's the part where I screwed up, or how can I help you? And maybe I'm going to get an answer I'm not capable of fulfilling.
Yeah. Consistency as well. Absolutely, Patricia. I think that goes back again to this system, this cadence that we're talking about. However, you're going to establish those rhythms, right? Myself and my team have a regular cadence as we talk about our opportunities and holding each other accountable to how we're moving those forward. But that consistency needs to be there.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry,
and the consistency going forward, we can reset it going forward. The rhythm happens going forward. The new support happens going forward. Saying to someone, here's what I'm looking for. Here's how I see it kind of happening. Can you do this? Will you do this? The questions I ask my kids, I'm stealing from parenting now. What, how, can't, won't, because they didn't get their homework done. And I'll ask those in that order on purpose. Well, do you know what the requirement is to hand in? Yes. You know how to get there? No. All right, this is where I lean in and help.
Absolutely. There's another question here I think we might want to go back and lean into a little bit. You touched on it earlier, Evan. It's around measuring accountability. And the question here is, as a leader, how do you measure accountability within your organization? And, I think for me, there might be a couple things here that we can parse out just because it's top of mind. And I've recently been reading it. It's just, there's another great book out there, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Covey, and I can't remember, the other author off the top.
Chris McChesney.
That's it, right? But the concept of, you're going to measure lag. There's lag measures, revenue, something that is a result of something.
Results, we said earlier.
Yeah, and then there's the lead measures, the levers, the things that you control on a day-to-day basis that produce that result that you can also measure. Let's just lean into this thought around measuring. It doesn't have to be 4 disciplines. It's just.
Okay. So here's my favorite idea about measure is stolen from I did a master's degree in sports psychology, performance psychology, but applied to sport. And inside that, there's this little subdiscipline called exercise adherence. How do you get a person to stick to the new program? January 1st, you've decided on your new program. Or in your team, you've decided on a new way. Or you had an org redesign and now you have a different set of responsibilities. How do you stick to the new program? And regularly, North America goes out and says, let's measure the results. According to exercise adherence, that's number 5. For helping you stick to it. According to North America, corporate loves a really clear goal. Yeah, that's number 4. The top 3 are not clear results or clear goal or measuring results. The top 3 are, number 3, signs of success. We fill a blackboard. We fill a flip chart. We fill a whiteboard in our office with all of the things that are going to happen if we go down this road. If Jenny is working on a new session called accountability and empowerment, what are some of the ripple effects? What's going to necessarily happen? It's inevitable that she's going to email Evan 85 times. It's inevitable that she's going to call Craig for coffee. It's inevitable that she's going to create bad slides. It's inevitable that then she's going to try and find images. It's inevitable she's going to read a bunch of new books. These are the ripple effects, right? That she's going to start talking about it. She's going to use the word ownership way more every week. So how do we measure accountability? First, name all of the side effects. If we're more accountable, here's all the things that are going to happen inevitably. We're going to say ownership way more often. We're going to be comfortable with saying ownership. And now I'm remembering one of my VPs over a decade ago who on a regular basis would say, so who owns this? And he would just drop that question into the middle of the boardroom. I think he did it 18 times a week. And we all got comfortable with Lawrence asking the question, so who owns this? Yeah. And there was more accountability because you put your hand up and said, well, I got that part. Cool, Evan, blah, 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 put his name beside it.
Yeah.
While we're here, the other 2, top of exercise adherence. So signs of success is number 3. Number 2 is what you just said, Craig, lead metrics. But in the world of sports psychology, they call it tracking inputs. You get obsessive about the activities that create the outcome. Yeah. Because by the time you get to the outcome, you've been off track.
And the activities that create it are the only thing you can control.
And you can nudge them all the way along in this 6-month journey or 3-month journey. And the number one way is social support. You're not in it alone. You have other people that help you, that work with you on this. And you show up because you know Mike is going to be there with his coffee 3 minutes early.
Absolutely.
I think
Jenny,
there's two.
so Jenny, yeah, I was going to lead to you, but maybe Ty, you can take this next question on that we'll kind of close with then, because Evan, this whole idea of the social piece, how do you have a team hold each other accountable as well? So maybe if you want to take your thought there, Jenny, and then roll into that, and then Evan will come back to you.
I think it actually, I might lean in there a bit with that social support. So the key thing in there that Evan just said too is who owns this. Notice that it was a part where that sort of human nature, we want to blanket and say, oh, it's all mine. And it very, very rarely these days in work is anything all somebody. So what part do you own? Be really clear on that. And that helps in the conversation. And then that social support, I was going to pick up on that too. We talk frequently about social capital. And so this system that Evan started with today, that system can't happen if we don't know each other. And knowing each other isn't knowing your job title and knowing your name. It's actually physically knowing each other. And so do I know a little bit about you as the person? Have I stopped to see who you are, to get to know you beyond your job title? And so that social capital is absolutely crucial if you want to have social support. We can't support each other if we don't know and we don't care.
Perfect. So we are at 8:43. And Evan, I know you pulled up your one slide already, looking backward and forward, but if we want to kind of lean into the one big idea here and then flow through the end, that would be
well. And we shared this. We shared this one big idea that accountability, full accountability, looks forward. We're not ever going to create accountability, solve accountability, improve accountability if we're only looking in the rearview mirror, for the simple reason that in the past there are no options. I can't be more accountable in the past. I can only be more accountable in the future. So let's talk about what we do tomorrow or the next day. We have to do that. And regardless of hierarchy, if I'm doing this with my boss, if I'm doing this with my peer, I'm the one being the leader when I say, okay, what do we do next? What do we do tomorrow? Who takes that? Who takes this? Never mind that it's way more positive.
Yeah.
People are more likely to step in. People are more likely to breathe a sigh of relief and, oh, okay, so.
Yeah.
I would suggest as well that feedback breeds ownership. We spun around this a little bit earlier. Why don't we do it? Why don't we bring it up, talk about it, ask? And we had some great reasons why people don't do it. I'm amazed. And I've read the research. If you want, I can find you the peer-reviewed papers. It's anywhere from 5 times to 8 times, depending on what the nature of the job is, the nature of the responsibility. Green apples on job. I'm coming back to that. If I name what was done right, I have 5 to 8 times more influence on that person than if I name what is wrong. If I name what was missed, if I name what was done incorrectly. And I can give a person control. When I say to my son, it's fantastic you got this, the lawn mowed from left to right. That way we end up in a place where blah, blah, blah. It's fantastic that you got everything into the car on Thursday. Now we can get out of here faster on Friday. If I say to my colleague, hey, I love that you got me the draft version of these slides a week ahead, because I'm the guy who loves to rehearse. When I tell them what they did right, what they did that was helpful, they now know how to be right in the future. And people want to know how to be successful. They want to know how to be right. They'll pick that up. They'll steal it out of your sentence, but you got to tell them. And someone mentioned motivation a minute ago. Start the second sentence when you're giving people feedback about what they did that was good. Not only what they did, but what it means. Because it's the meaning that provides motivation. The action itself provides an opportunity for me to have some control and for me to be more comfortable taking ownership. It doesn't create motivation. Motivation comes from meaning. If I know what this means to you, then I'm more motivated. So I get a green apples on something. Job. Ooh. And I have full permission from a client to share this. I believe in confidentiality. I practice it daily. Sounded a little epistem. Anyway, he is on a bent to not say the word job anymore, to very purposely say to his staff, responsibility, to replace the word job with the word responsible. You're responsible for this. You've got this. You can handle this. You're capable of this. To remove the word job from his vernacular and start saying you're responsible, you're able.
Good.
Oh yeah, I had a big whoa when he committed to do that with his team for the next 2 weeks before we talked again. I was like, whoa.
Perfect.
That's so big neat.
Yeah. Excellent. Oh, just a couple more, I think. Your 3 questions.
Yeah. So one more idea. You can ask people into initiative. And there's a massive overlap between accountability and initiative. People who are afraid of accountability don't take initiative. People who are comfortable with accountability do take initiative. And you can ask people into initiative. The piece that's missing here, the step that I didn't put in, is that we have a goal or a challenge. And so it's pretty straightforward. If you want to slowly, bit by bit, drop by drop, build accountability, build initiative, to ask people about, well, what are the options? It's very safe to come up with options. I don't own any of them. I'm just naming them. All I have to do is think to come up with options, except that's what we want them to do. What's your suggestion? Or substitute the word recommendation. A step up from options is, what's the one? In your opinion, your belief, your feeling, what's the one that would work? And then the step between suggestion or recommendation and intention, that's where the responsibility piece kicks in, right? Responsibility, accountability piece kicks in, because when you go to intention, you're talking about, if no one vetoes me, I'm about to do this. That's what intention means. And I would go down the hall to my boss and say, hey, we've got a launch next week on Thursday. I know that if we ship Wednesday, it won't get there in time. So unless you tell me otherwise, I'm putting this in a box today. Intention. And he says, yeah, great, do it. Cool. And off I go. And I spend the money and I spend the time.
Absolutely.
But this is a massive overlap with accountability. And we can ask people up this scale, regardless of whether they are peers in a different department, or frankly, even if they're your boss.
Yeah. I really like that. That's good. Perfect. Okay, and 3 questions to leave folks with.
3 questions I would like to leave everyone with is, number 1, how do you talk about accountability? How comfortable are you saying the word responsible when you talk to a staff member or a peer? Saying ownership, saying intention, using words that are not aggressive, but rather clearly defining accountability and putting it out in the space between you for someone to pick it up. Some of the big ones are responsible, ownership, intention, and to use those kinds of terms in your vernacular way more often.
Yeah.
To say straight out to a person what you rely on them for. I'm amazed how often in formal annual performance reviews, we tell people what to improve and what they did well, and we rarely take the 30 seconds to say, what I rely on you for is. Now, maybe we use different words, but when I start saying to someone that I'm relying on them, they very quickly say, well, but I can't get that done next week. Or I don't have time tomorrow. Or they say yes, and they accept the ownership of that.
Yeah.
There's a very soft giving ownership when you tell someone what you rely on them for. And then, of course, the question, how easy is it for someone to own something?
Really good.
Is it scary? Are they going to get called into the office? Are they going to get called out? Are they going to get left alone with the ownership of this? I think there's a lot of people who don't reach in and pick up some accountability because they're dreading carrying it alone.
Mhm.
Yeah, really good. Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Jenny, final thoughts?
No, I think those questions are a really good place to finish. I agree with Lisa had popped in the chat. You know, I rely. Where do we rely? We don't hear that enough. And full on to using the language more. A lot of it comes to language, is to how we express those pieces. So that's a good part for us to all leave with. The, you know, where will we use the words responsible, accountable, rely, ownership, and especially that, you know, what do I own in this situation?
Oh, that's really good. So fantastic place to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Evan and Jenny, I thank you. I rely on you to bring great content to life, and I really do appreciate it. So have a fantastic day, everybody. We will see you again October 14th. So, and thanks again, Evan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, everyone. Have a good Tuesday.
See ya.